Shalom Aleichem. Mishnah Yomi continues for Shabbat Devarim, Shabbat Chazon. We have a lot of Devarim to get into. We are holding in chapter 1 of Beitzah, Mishnah 4. Zimen Shechorim. He designated darker colored doves or birds. Remember, we talked about yesterday, Machlokas, about how to designate the birds, living birds in your bird coop that you intend to eat on Yom Tov. The next day, you designate them in advance. So what happens if he was designated darker colored birds, and Matzah Levonim, and he found lighter colored birds? Levonim, Matzah Shechorim, or vice versa. Or Shnayim, he designated 2 birds, Matzah Shlosha. He found 3 birds. Now that might sound even wonderful. You've got even more birds here, but the Mishnah says Asurim. All the birds are Asur to yours on Yom Tov. They haven't been designated. The concern is the birds you actually picked Erev Yom Tov to eat on Yom Tov have waddled away, and these are actually new birds. Now I say waddled because the Gemara explains the case is these are fairly young birds that don't really fly yet. They don't go so far. And also dealing with a case where there's no other dovecote with other birds. You did not designate within 50 amot. So these birds that came in, they likely are completely foreign birds. And so it could be your birds left and new birds came in. Now the Mishnah says a case of Shlosha, Matzah Shnayim. He designated 3 birds, and then the next day on Yom Tov he found only 2 birds, Mutar. And those 2 birds are still Mutar. We assume that the 3rd bird designated just wandered off. It's not like the case where he only designated 2 and found 3, where a new bird has come in. So perhaps a lot of new birds came in. You're really not sure which ones you designated. Mishnah continues, B'toicha kain. He designated birds inside the coop or inside the crevice. Matzah lifneya can be found them outside in front. Asurim. So it could have been your birds literally flew the coop or waddled off from the coop, and new birds have come in and they're just hanging out in front of the coop. B'me'ein shom elahem. If there's no other birds in the area, just these birds you had in the coop, no non-designated birds here, harilu mitarin. So these birds right in front, we're going to be able to assume, if there's no other birds in the area, that these are the same birds you designated, and you can enjoy them for Yom Tov. So that bird has flown onto Mishnah Hey. Beit Shammai omrim ein misolkin et atrisim b'Yom Tov. We do not detach the shutters on Yom Tov. Now the first thing we explain, these are sort of large doors that a vendor uses for his booth. Now, it could be like selling spices or food items that are mutter to sell on Yom Tov, and of course they'll do the cheshbon, the money afterwards. And these vendors would have like a large cabinet or a storefront with these shutters closing the box or the cabinet or the store, and you'd take off the shutter and then you'd put it down flat as a table, and you'd put your wares on the table. So the issue Beit Shammai has with removing these shutters and putting them up is it looks like demolishing when you remove the shutters, and then when you put them back, it looks like building. Well, Beit Hillel matirin aflachzir. Beit Hillel says you could take them down, and then you can put the shutters back on when you're done. Now the Gemara explains we're dealing with a case of a single pin or single hinge holding on these trees, these shutters. They say if there's no hinges at all and they're just sort of laying there, then they would agree it's mutter. It doesn't really look like building. If there's 2 hinges, they would agree it's definitely usser, even to take them off, because dealing with 2 pins or 2 points of contact with the doors definitely looks like building and demolishing. It's rabbinically, but it looks quite like building and demolishing. You know, hanging a front door on your house is definitely building. So it's a case where there's 1 pin holding these treesim on where they have this machlokus. If it's suitable to, it looks enough like building and demolishing that Beit Shammai would make a gezerah not to do it even with 1 pin. Now the Mishnah brings another case. Beit Shammai omrim ein notlin et eli lekotzev alav basar. You can't take a large pestle. It's sort of a big, thick board to chop meat on it, because this pestle is usually used for grinding like industrial quantities here. So it's technically muksa. Beit Hillel matirin. Beit Hillel says it's allowed because you're using it letzorech gufo, a concept we mentioned in Masechet Shabbat about muksa. If it's a kli you can use for its own use, then yeah, it's muksa to move it, but if you need to actually use it, then it would be allowed. An example would be a hammer is muksa, but if you have a walnut, you could pick up the hammer to open the walnut. The Barnur here explains that Beit Shammai wouldn't agree to Beit Hillel because this is not just an ordinary beam. This is like an industrial size, expensive machinery kind of component. So it'd be like muksa machmat chesron kis. It's expensive, so you wouldn't usually use it for chopping. And the Mishnah goes on, Beit Shammai orim ein notin at the or lifnei dorsin. If you slaughter an animal on Yom Tov, you can't set out the hide, outside where people are going to walk on it. Now, actually walking over a hide or beating it or trampling on it was the first step in the tanning process to sort of soften it up and prevent it from decaying. Beit Shammai goes on, V'lo yagbehaina ela im ken yesh imo kazayit basar. And you can't pick it up again. If you drop the hide on Shabbat, you can't even pick it up unless it has a kazayit, an olive's bulk of meat on it, because then it's technically food. It's bottled to the food. Beit Hillel matirin. Beit Hillel allows both to put the hide out to be walked on and to pick up the hide, because they say there's a big loss if somebody slaughters an animal on Yom Tov. It's a nice, beautiful deer, delicious, but they can't set the hide out, which is normally done, and they can't pick up the hide anymore. It's muksa. Then they might not want to shecht the animal in the first place. They're not going to have any meat on Yom Tov. And to not have any meat during the 9 days before Tisha B'Av, except for Shabbat we do, but to not have during the weekdays, okay, that we understand. But to not have meat on Yom Tov, that's like, oy. So Beit Hillel would allow it because of Simchat Yom Tov. We want people to be able to enjoy their meat and not worry about wasting the hide that comes with it. Finally, Beit Shammai omrim ein motzin lo et hakatan v'lo et halulav v'lo et sefer Torah l'reshut harabim. It says on Yom Tov we don't carry out a child or a lulav or a Torah scroll into a reshut harabim, into a public domain, because this is a malacha of hotzah. We discussed in detail in Masechet Shabbat. Now, what's going on is we know that certain malachot are allowed on Yom Tov for ochel nefesh, for food preparation, for cooking. But Beit Shammai says that hotzah is not one of these things, that carrying your child or your lulav is not involved in food preparation. Beit Hillel matiri. Beit Hillel allows us to carry these things into Reshut Rabim. He says a famous mitoch. The word mitoch means basically since. And it's short for mitoch shahutra letzorech, since it's allowed for a certain need, the need of cooking, the need of ochel nefesh, hutra nami shelo letzorech. It's also allowed for not that need. So since you could carry things in Reshut Rabim that are food preparation related, you can also carry things in Reshut Rabim when there is a need for it on Yom Tov, to carry your child to shul, to carry your lulav to shul, to carry a sefer Torah somewhere. That would definitely be an allowed use. Of course, Beit Hillel would agree, if it's something you don't need on Yom Tov, there's no Yom Tov use, you should not be carrying that in the street. Yashar Kochachem and Shabbat Shalom, good Shabbos.